Hello Octoprint fans, former lurker here. Today I'm going to show you how to set up a USB webcam and to enable custom image preferences in Octolapse. So custom image preferences, if you're here, you probably know what they do, but if you don't, they allow you to edit things like contrast and exposure and zoom, all depending on what your camera supports, all inside of Octolapse. So to get started, first you want to go to the Octolapse wiki. And if you search for Octolapse in GitHub, you'll probably land on this page. Then you want to click this wiki link. I've dropped one in the comments below, so check that out for a direct link. You click here, there will be a section called Guides, and you want to find the Enable Custom Image Preferences guide. Now that's assuming that you've already installed and set up Octolapse. If you have not, find the Getting Started guide here at the top. Go ahead and follow that now. There's a link to a video inside of there that will help you get started, and then come on back here. And once you've got that finished, click on this link for the Custom Image Preferences guide, and this is what I'm going to be following. So, in order to get the custom image preferences to work, the first thing you have to ensure is that you're using MJPEG Streamer. Fortunately, if you're using Octopi, MJPEG Streamer comes installed by default. So if you're using a different streaming server, or maybe an IP webcam that has its own built-in server, unfortunately these custom image preferences aren't going to work. And also there's a couple plugins that can interfere. Octoprint Anywhere and the Spaghetti Detective, they're great plugins. They use their own streaming server, a custom server, and unfortunately they're not compatible. So if you want to follow this guide, disable these plugins for now. Maybe in the future I'll get this to work, but right now, unfortunately, they don't. Also, if you're using a Raspberry Pi camera, there's a slightly different guide. There's some different steps you need to follow. You can click this link here, or I've dropped a link to the video explaining how to do that below. Check that out. All right, so the first thing you want to do is connect to your Raspberry Pi. I have a guide showing how to connect via PuTTY, and that's what we're going to use today. If you're unsure how to do that, or if you've never connected to your Pi before, there's lots of different ways to do it. I show one here. Follow this guide. It should help get you started. It shows how to set up an SSH connection and tells you everything to do. So go ahead and follow that now, and then come back here, and I am going to show you how this works. So let's switch to the terminal. This is PuTTY. I'm sorry if it's a little small. I have already configured a profile. So I'm going to click Open to connect to that. And then you should get a terminal window. And the first thing you got to do is log in. So I'm going to use the default user of Pi. Then I have to type in my password. I'm going to paste mine in. So I'm copying it right now. And to paste in PuTTY, all you have to do is click in the window and right click once. And you're not going to see anything change, but I assure you it will paste in whatever's in the clipboard. Right click now, and I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm connected. So the first thing we're going to do, show you this in the wiki, is we're going to edit the octopi.txt file. This file controls a lot of the setup of Octoprint, specifically the webcam settings. So that's why we're going to go in here. If you copy this command, this is going to open up the nano editor as an administrator. That's why we're using sudo. And it's going to open the octopi.txt file, which is located here. If I copy all this out, and then if I switch to my terminal window and right click in here, it's going to paste that command. If I hit enter, it's going to ask me to enter my password. So go ahead and enter your password. And then that will open up Nano. Now this is the octopi.txt file. Nano is a text editor. And if you go back to the wiki, what we're going to be changing is at the very bottom of the octopi.txt file, you'll find these two lines, and you can see what that looks like here. We want to replace these with these two lines right here. And you may notice that these lines are commented out. You need to make sure that you remove this character, otherwise these settings won't take effect. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to switch back to my terminal window. I'm going to hit page down to go to the very bottom, and you can see these two lines that we want to replace right here. So I'm just going to use backspace to delete them. And then I'm going to right click to paste, and these are the two lines that we want. Now, while you're in here, you may want to adjust your camera settings. If you go up a little bit, you'll find this line. I believe it's commented out by default, so you want to make sure you erase this pound character at the beginning. And then right here you can set your resolution and your frame rate. And I want to warn you, I'm using a frame rate of 30 frames per second right here. This is going to take up a lot of bandwidth, so if you're not using an Ethernet connection, and actually some browsers have trouble rendering MJPEG streams with a high frame rate. So if 30 doesn't work for you, you may want to dial it back. But it turns out there's some advantages to using a high frame rate. I'll discuss those a little later. Basically, it reduces the image capture time. So now that we've made all our adjustments, we want to save this. So if you hold down Control and press O for output, it'll ask you if you want to overwrite the octopi.txt file. And we do, so hit Enter to confirm that. Now the file's saved, and we want to exit. So Control X will get us out of here. Now, in order for these changes to take effect, we need to reboot our Pi. And you can do that by typing in sudo, S-U-D-O, space, reboot, R-E-B-O-O-T. Now, I'm not going to actually reboot my Pi because that would take a little time, but reboot yours and open up the Octoprint tab and wait for it to reload. You'll have a little message that says that it's waiting. So it'll take a minute for it to reboot. And once it comes back up, you'll see a screen that looks like this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to click on this link here to the left of your webcam settings. It's cameras. And we're going to create a new profile. Now, you could edit the one that exists here, but I'm going to show you how to create a new profile from scratch. So click on cameras and then click add profile right here. You'll notice that we've opened up the Octolapse settings and it's taken us to the camera tab. We're going to click here to add a new camera profile. I'm going to give it a reasonable name, Logitech C920. That way I know what camera it is. And we're using a webcam, so make sure that's selected here in the camera type. And then in the webcam setup section, most of this is going to be filled out for you, especially if you're using Octopi and you're using the default settings. So in general, this should work. So you may want to click the test webcam button, and that'll tell you if this snapshot address is correct. And below that is the stream address template. So this is the URL that actually shows your camera stream. Now, if I copy that and I open a new window and paste it in here, I should see my webcam right here. So this is the stream. So that's how I know that that's correct. So let's save that. If you're having any trouble, if some of these settings don't work, or if you get an error message when you click test webcam, or if you don't see your stream over here when you paste the URL in, open up the wiki. You scroll up here, there's a troubleshooting page. Open that in a new window. And there's a section for cameras. And I'm planning on adding some more troubleshooting steps here and a link to the troubleshooting guide. But go here. I'm sure that the content is going to change a lot, especially right after the release of Octolapse version 0.4. So check here, that should update often. Let's switch back to our Octoprint tab. There's a couple other things you may want to change. In here in the general settings, there's this snapshot delay, and it's set to a pretty conservative default of 125 milliseconds. I know that 60 actually works pretty well for my camera. You want this as low as possible because the higher this is, the more time it's going to take for Octolapse to capture an image. And you really want it to take as little time as possible. And the reason it's not set to 0 is that while your printer's printing, your printer's kind of shaking and your webcam's probably shaking. So having a little bit of delay here can give your camera time to smooth out so that you get a nice, perfect snapshot. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. You want it as low as possible to get a stable image. I know from trial and error that this is a good number for me. I'm going to come down here and click Save. That's going to save this new profile. You'll see it shows up here. If I close out these settings, you'll also see that the camera shows up here. So now we want to edit this and enable our custom image preference. I'm going to click this Edit pin. And of course, we could have done that earlier, but I just wanted to show you where the profile goes and how to select it. If you scroll to the bottom, you'll find this section, Custom Image Preferences, and there's an enabled box. So if I click on that, Octolapse is going to run some tests on your camera to make sure that it's actually capable of using the custom image preferences. And hopefully when you click on it, you'll see a new section expand right here that shows you a couple new settings You can click on these little help icons to the right of any setting. They'll open up a little help page that kind of explains what these settings do. So you may want to read those and see which ones of these you have enabled. Honestly, you probably want to have them all enabled. And if you got an error message when you clicked enabled here, navigate to that troubleshooting page. Hopefully I've added some steps to help you. Okay, now our profile is pretty much set up. So let's hit save. And then in the top here, in our time-lapse preview, we want to make sure that we pick the camera that we just created from the drop-down list. Now this section, what it does, it shows the most recent snapshot taken by the whatever camera's picked. So I actually ran a time lapse using this camera, and this is the last snapshot that I got. It's not going to show your camera stream. It's only going to show the most recent snapshot taken by Octolapse. Now, since we created a new camera profile here, there aren't going to be any snapshots because we haven't run a time lapse with that camera enabled. So when you pick your camera, don't be surprised when you see this message. It's basically telling you that there's no snapshot for this camera to show you because none have been taken. So this is normal, and you'll start to get snapshots here as soon as you run your first print with this camera. Now, one of the things you'll notice when I had this other camera, there was no edit pin here, but when I pick the new one, this edit pin shows up. Well, this is only available if you have custom image preferences enabled. And when you click on it, it opens a web page that shows all the settings that your camera supports and has your camera stream. This is a live stream, so that when I adjust these settings, I think I have the wrong camera URL. Sorry about that, folks. I'm running two webcams, so I have a different port on my other webcam. I've changed that. All right. So now, when I adjust this, you see it affects the image immediately. And if it doesn't, you may want to check out your snapshot URL, your camera address. And again, all these settings, you'll see these help links. They will explain what the setting does. Now, not all cameras are recognized. You'll notice right here that Octolapse recognized this camera, so it knows what settings it supports and it offers help. There's also a default page for all cameras, and this is dynamically generated based on the types of settings that Octolapse has discovered your camera supports. So yours may look a little bit different. You may have different controls. You may have some that I don't see. You may not see some that I have. I'm going to use the custom page because it's just nicer. Everything's grouped. There's some other validation. If your camera if it's not detected here, and if you don't have a custom page, if you would click this button and your camera's unknown to Octolapse, you'll get an error message saying that no custom page was detected. You might want to let me know. If I can, I'll add a custom. So once you're in here, you'll notice a couple buttons at the top. So Octolapse can display your page in single or dual column mode. Dual columns, you don't have quite as much room to adjust your settings, but it shows more controls. It's kind of more concise. Actually what I prefer. There's also a button here to stabilize your extruder. And this is useful for adjusting your focus if your camera supports focus control. If I click this button, Octolapse is going to home your extruder and your bed, and then it's going to move the extruder into the stabilization position. So the stabilization position is going to be determined by this setting. So let's say I set it to centered here. I open up my custom image preferences and hit stabilize extruder. It's going to ask me to make sure that my bed is clear, that nothing is sitting on here, because you don't want your extruder and your bed to run into something. So make sure it's clear before you hit OK, and it'll immediately home. Homed X, now it's homing Y. Now it's going to move into the stabilization position. And you'll notice my camera is not exactly pointed in the right direction, and it's not focused perfectly based on where the extruder is. So normally I would adjust the camera, but instead I'm going to adjust the stabilization position to the back center. We're going to open this up again. We're going to stabilize it one more time. because my camera was adjusted for the center. Okay, so now the camera's pretty much in the center. There's a few settings that you're going to want to adjust if you have the capability. If your camera has a focus adjustment, always set it to manual focus. Focus your camera. It probably helps to have something sitting on the bed. I would put it exactly where your print is going to be. That way you can focus on your object and you know that it's going to be in focus for the time lapse. And I recommend kind of starting low and increasing your focus until things look clear, or at least reasonably clear. I'd say that's reasonably clear. And keep increasing it until it's a little out of focus. Say that's where it first. So your correct focus setting is going to be somewhere in between those two values. So I know from trial and error that this is a good number on my camera. And you might also notice that when you're adjusting the focus, it's not like my camera goes up in increments of 5. And the reason it does this is because Octolapse knows that this camera only supports focus in increments of 5. So 35 is a valid focus number, but 35 or 36.2 is not. So the reason you can't pick that number in here is because your camera doesn't support that. 5, whoops. 5 is good. 4 is good. White balance, if your camera supports auto white balance, you want to make sure that's disabled. Again, if the white balance is automatic, that'll change throughout your print and it might lead to flicker or some not great time-lapse quality. So set that to manual, and then what it does is it changes your image from kind of a blue hue to red. And the goal here is to get it as close to real life true color as possible. Find somewhere around here, and it depends on your lighting and your environment. And I do recommend you use bright lights on your camera. The brighter the better. You'll have just better quality overall. Also, some cameras have separate channels for the temperature, like the Raspberry Pi camera has a red and a blue color, so you may have something like that. Spend a little bit of time on that, make sure that your colors look correct. And the other one, if your camera supports it, that's really important that you get right, is the exposure. And if your camera has a gain, those two settings are kind of connected. So you want to set those to manual, and how this is done will depend on your camera, but my camera's got a drop-down box here. I pick manual, and now these exposure controls will work. You'll notice if I have them set on auto, I can't even control them. That's because the custom image preferences page is smart enough to know that these controls won't work unless you set this to manual. So one thing you want to do to your exposure, you want it as low as possible. You want it as low as possible because you want to minimize shaking. You don't want blurry images. So you want that down, and you want your gain to kind of compensate. Now this is a little bit of a balancing act because at some point your exposure is all the way down and you crank your gain, it's just not enough to cover it. And also if your exposure is up, you're going to get some maybe not as good colors if your gain's too high. So you just have to kind of play with these to get your exposure as low as possible while still getting, a good bright image. And my camera supports zoom as well, digital zoom, so I can zoom in and I can pan and tilt around. So you may want to play with those if your camera has those controls. And mine also has a power line frequency. This compensates for flicker introduced by the frequency of your power. And in the US, that's 60 hertz. In Europe, and depending on where you are, you might have a different value. You can look up the frequency of your power line, pick whatever value your local area uses, and then we want to save our setting. Now, if you find that you have a problem with your settings or you've messed your image up, you can click this defaults button and it'll apply the default settings for your camera. This isn't foolproof because Octolapse relies on your camera properly reporting its defaults. They don't always do that. So your mileage may vary, but in general this will reset to defaults. And if you hit cancel, Octolapse will try to undo whatever changes you've made. Now this doesn't work all the time either. We first enabled image settings, so it can't really undo anything right now, but later when you save your profile, it's set up again. 35. this. It's good enough for now. Now if I make an adjustment, say I crank my brightness up, oh, I don't want that, and I hit cancel. I edit it again, you'll notice the image is back to the way it was. The cancel button in general hopefully should undo any mistakes that you made. I'm going to go ahead and close that. So now our image preferences are set up, and our print is set to apply these, Octolapse is set to apply these as soon as your print starts. So now you want to run a test print. So I'm going to enable test mode to make this easy. And little box here, when you click it, you'll get a little message at the top that says the test mode is going to be applied when the print starts. Now you just have to pick a good test object. I recommend something small, something pretty quick. This is a tiny little test cube, so it's good, for testing things to make sure that your image. I'll hit print. In the Getting Started guide, I discuss what this snapshot plan preview is, so check that out if this is surprising to you or if you don't understand what this means. And accept. Now Octolapse is going to start. So if we look at our control tab, you can see that the print started. It's homing right now. And basically, if you go to the Octolapse tab and scroll to the bottom, if you're using one of the smart triggers, you'll see this snapshot plan at the bottom. It'll actually kind of tell you how long it's going to be before Octolapse captures a snapshot. So it's processed, a couple lines. There's 45 left before it takes its first snapshot. And since my printer's homing right now, that takes a little bit of time. It's kind of stuck at 28.57%, but you'll see this change as G-codes are sent to your printer. So let's go to the control tab and see what it's doing. It's almost leveled right now. All right, and now you'll notice since we're running test mode that the fan isn't moving, and it's actually not laying down any plastic, and that's because test mode prevents extrusion moves. It prevents your bed from heating up, so you'll notice everything's cool. If it's not, definitely let me know. And it's priming. So now it's starting, and if you go to the, there it just took a picture. If you go to the Octolapse tab, you'll now see a snapshot that was captured. So this is the most recent snapshot that was taken. If you think your image quality isn't quite perfect, you can go in here and edit it. Now keep in mind, anything you edit here, that's going to affect the camera immediately. So I don't recommend doing this in the middle of an actual print where you're capturing a real time lapse, because otherwise your image preferences will change in the middle and you're definitely going to see that. Cancel. You see it's taking a snapshot. The newest snapshot comes in. If I hit play, I don't know if you notice that little bit of movement, but it's basically giving you a preview of what your time lapse is going to look like. And if you're unhappy with your image quality, keep adjusting it here. Keep waiting for that snapshot. Check it to make sure it looks good. You can actually zoom in by clicking that button and get a full screen view. This is a good place to scrutinize what your image looks like. And as soon as you're done adjusting it, let's see, I can cancel this. Now it's going to render a video, and you'll see your progress showing up here. As soon as these videos are done rendering, check the video for the camera you just added. And if you don't like it, I recommend going back into your images, your image preferences, adjusting them, running another time lapse in test mode until your image quality is perfect. All right, well, I hope this guide was helpful. I'm going to keep updating them, but make sure you check back to the wiki because I update those more frequently than I do these videos. They take quite a bit of time, so I'm much more likely to have new information put on the actual wiki. And also, I would appreciate it if you would look at the bottom here of the Octolapse tab at these links. There's a link to the About page that shows all the patron supporters, has a little bit of information that might be fun to read. There's a link straight to the GitHub page. There's a link to my YouTube channel, to a PayPal page where you can send me money for coffee or a beer. I really appreciate that. Or if you want to become a patron, there's a link to Patreon right here. All right, so thanks for watching this video. What'd you think? Leave me some comments below, some suggestions for improvement, and thanks for watching.